Teachers Guild of New South Wales and Wellbeing Australia acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia. We recognise the continuing connection to the traditional lands and waters and would like to pay the respects to their elders, past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Frederick Osman. As the President of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales, I'm pleased to welcome you this evening for our panel forum on the very important topic on how has COVID-19 changed learning. On behalf of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales Council and the Board of Wellbeing Australia, I'd like to thank in advance our expert panel this evening for being here today and providing and sharing the educational learnings on this relevant topic. We are living in unprecedented times. COVID-19, bushfires, floods have not only disrupted businesses and industries, but also the education system as the greatest disruption in decades. People cannot fathom the amount of work that goes into teaching unless they are a teacher themselves or live with a teacher. Our teacher said, parents to some extent had to become a teacher at home, monitoring and motivating their child to do work. This gave them a small glimpse into what the job entails. The appreciation was a nice feeling. The evening will be a welcome opportunity to reflect on the challenges that have been faced as we look forward to emerging from the pandemic stronger and more connected than ever before. Our moderator for this evening, Catherine Taylor, is a Director of Turning Point Consulting, Centre of Excellence in Leadership Change and Wellbeing, Board Member of Wellbeing Australia. With over 20 years experience in education and corporate, in human resources, leadership, organisational change, talent management, purposeful performance appraisals and individual coaching, Catherine has been awarded a Career Management Fellowship and an Honorary Fellowship from the Teachers Guild of New South Wales for her work in leadership, wellbeing and transition across K-12, faith-based, independent, department, schools delivering staff, student, parent initiatives to offer support in creating a platform for positive personal evaluation, planning and transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Catherine Taylor, which will introduce our panellists for this evening. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you all for joining us tonight. It certainly has been a unique year, to say the least. Very excited to be here tonight to look at not just all those things that have happened that we're listening to that feel like negatives, and certainly the bushfires and what started this year was a highly emotional and emotive point in time. Looking back at this year, I guess it's important, and I'll ask my colleague Jackie to introduce Wellbeing Australia in a moment, but for us, our focus is very much about solutions. It's about where do we go forward and how do we respond and react when our wellbeing is challenged. So tonight we see this as an amazing opportunity to collaborate with the Guild and all of those present on what are we seeing as those golden moments? What are those fabulous learnings and opportunities we would not have had if we hadn't had the year that we've had? So Jackie, I might just hand to you to introduce Wellbeing Australia.
Thanks, Catherine. So yes, I'm putting my Wellbeing Australia Director's hat on now and introducing Wellbeing Australia. So Wellbeing Australia is a not-for-profit network. We bring together people and organisations who are committed to developing healthy relationships that lead to individual, community and community wellbeing, with particular emphasis on family, education and the workplace. So it's the potted version. Thanks, Catherine.
Beautiful. We're also very fortunate to have a brilliant panel of diverse experts in education, definitely, in terms of what everyone's been doing. So I might just get everybody to introduce themselves and give us a bit of context of your school and what your dynamic and demographic are, so we can see where we're coming from. So Mark and Doris from Penrith Selective, can you share?
I'm Doris Lee from Penrith Selective High School, Deputy Principal.
I'm Mark Long, I'm the Principal at Penrith Selective High School. We're one of the 19 academically fully selective high schools in New South Wales with an enrolment this year of 916 students working from Year 7 through to Year 12.
Beautiful. Belinda, Natalie?
Belinda, you go first.
I'm Belinda. I'm from St Mary's Cathedral College and I'm the leader of Innovation and Pedagogy.
I'm Natalie Devonish. I'm the Assistant Principal at St Mary's Cathedral College. We're a Catholic all-boys school, part of the Sydney Catholic Schools diocese, and we have about approximately 800 boys, and it's a school from year 3 through to year 12.
Beautiful. And then Margaret and Darren.
I'm Margaret from St Philip's Christian College at Cessnock. It's a beautiful Hunter Valley school. We've got a nice, lovely rural school, and I'm the head of junior school there.
And my name's Darren Cox. I'm the principal at St Philip's Christian College in Cessnock. We have 1,100 students K-12 and a prep on site as well, and a special school. And from Cessnock, a lower socioeconomic regional town.
Beautiful. And putting your other hat on now, Jackie, because it's important when we're talking about education to represent parents and community as well, and one of Jackie's other hats is very much in that space.
So my other hat, I've lived their life. I've been in schools around schools and education for about 30 years. I'm currently a consultant in private practice, and I work in the area of parent, family and community engagement, around a whole lot of issues around education generally, and leadership and organisational change. And also in the area of wellbeing, lots of wellbeing stuff, and it's certainly been a big year for it. But also too, with in another life, I also do a lot of work around veteran wellbeing, mental health and advocacy.
Beautiful. So we're very fortunate. I think the diversity that you guys bring, but certainly the perspectives and what your schools have done throughout the year is incredible, absolutely incredible to manage. So if we look at where we're coming from and what we're talking about tonight, what we've faced and what we've looked at from an educational perspective is quite diverse. So the key themes that came through from questions and from discussion from the audience, but also from the panel when we started speaking about these topics, were those challenges we each faced. What were they? Were they unique? Were they common? What were those themes we experienced? Also, how we started to approach our staff development and our staff wellbeing, and were there changes around that space, which naturally led to the concept of, well, what was teaching and learning? How did the learning frameworks change? Which I'm sure we'd all agree completely turned upside down is probably the best expression. And so what worked? What worked from there, and what did we learn from those changes and those opportunities we couldn't have had? And then finally, I think that challenge around continuing to engage the community with a lot of regulatory processes around blocking parents from entering just purely from a safety perspective. So how did we make sure we felt inclusive and welcoming at the same time? So we've been very fortunate to have a number of questions shared with us from attendees and from people who were wanting to dial into the night. So just in terms of flow, we've got some really key themes there that are critical for where we're coming from and where we're going. I guess to start us off, just to set a tone for what your school experienced, and maybe Natalie, you can kick us off here, is what was the greatest challenge your school faced this year?
I was thinking through this question. I think one of the things for us was there was such the speed of change in regards to the government regulations, so keeping up with just what we were allowed to do and what we weren't allowed to do. And there were obviously the government regulations, but being part of Sydney Catholic Schools, there were also another layer of the regulations that they had. So there was not their interpretation of it, they obviously followed what the government requirements were, but there was certainly an extra layer of us, and it was the speed at which you just couldn't plan really any more than 2 weeks ahead. So if we were trying to manage that through the COVID period, it was something that we were very conscious of. You may think that this was going to be, okay for the next month, but it literally could change on a dime, in the space of 24 hours. And so it was really difficult just keeping up with, not difficult but challenging, trying to keep up with those, and then implementing the next change that would happen, and then informing your staff and parents and students. So.
And definitely it was that consistency, wasn't it? We settled into the new, and then there were changes through.
Definitely. So
great point to note that coming from Sydney Catholic Schools, obviously there's the layers as there are from department and other systems that we need to continue from there. And what about you guys, Darren?
I think we all would have experienced similar challenges. I think the greatest challenge that we had was continuing to inspire a sense of hope and positivity and optimism in young people. At school, I was sort of the mischievous boy. I know many of us find it hard to believe after engaging with me, but it wasn't necessarily outcome 1A that excited me. It was actually the excursion, the sporting event, the whatever else it be. They were the things that kept me engaged and motivated at school. And when you strip away a lot of those things from students, I think that was probably our greatest challenge for a lot of people as to what have I got to look forward to, and unlike most critical incidents that sort of almost have an end date, you know, you can fix it and move on. It just didn't have an end date.
No.
And so there's this whole hope, sense of you can't dangle too many carrots because they're probably not going to be there for the kids and you don't want to give them false hope. I think that was probably the greatest challenge amongst the kids, is that overall sense.
And Margaret, what about from the junior school perspective?
So for us, I guess technology, along with what has already been said, our secondary students were quite used to using technology, and so while we had started along this path with our junior school staff and with our students, it was the rapid change that we needed to adapt to remote learning. So credit to the teachers who went above and beyond, and teachers who, had been more experienced in their teaching. They were able to quickly adapt, and so for things where we would roll out change over a matter of months or years, they had to quickly adapt to it. So yeah,
That's lovely. And Mark, what about for you guys in that selective space?
I think in a school that's working 7 to 12, at its core is everyone looked after to the best of our ability. In particular then, how do you look after year 12? Because you have to look after them to have them perform at the level of where it is. What's the impact of NESA's implications around changes to weightings of assessments? How do you get them there? And then how do you keep 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 moving along and look after the staff? And it's an interesting partnership tonight with Wellbeing, because it was a really strong role to look at what the research was around schools, but also to look after the wellbeing of the wider community. Because at that time, when we think about it, every day people were turning up. My son lost their job, my partner lost their job. This was happening back and forth. So knowing that school could be a place where we could be as structured as we could be, so parents could go to work, because at that point that was a really big issue as well. So it was intense, but there was a wonderful opportunity for schools to genuinely be a community.
So true. This year has really blended everything, hasn't it? Those lines and those balances we often try and talk about from a wellbeing perspective have just sort of gone out the window. And that focus on, let's centre around what's in our control when we're talking about wellbeing, suddenly everything was out of our control, and that balance that was tilted out. Jackie, what about from the parent piece?
Well, I was going to actually say that I started off the year in my final few months as the board chair of Mount St Benedict College. Okay, so I was sort of hoping for a graceful exit. New principal starting. We recruited a new principal starting, and the poor fella, less than a month in, and bang, COVID. So one of the things that I was delighted about was one of the things that we had planned for in our contingency planning a number of years ago was to be able to move online if necessary. But we were thinking, if a building is no longer available, or we've got extensive works, or that sort of contingency planning, or but we weren't thinking the whole school, right? We were thinking possibly a year group, or maybe a faculty, or something like that. So we really pivoted pretty quickly to being able to take a whole year group out of school as a trial run. Everyone's dream, year 9, gone for the day. But it worked. It worked incredibly well, and that wellbeing piece was such a strong thing for it's a big part of the college anyway. But it was that the daily check-ins, the phone calls, and the catching up with the students who had been struggling and would have normally been getting quite a bit of attention and contact with staff. So whole school assemblies on Zoom, everything worked, nothing crashed, and all that sort of stuff happened really quickly. But I think broadly speaking, I think what was really great to see was that move away from that initial piece where there were the memes and the stories about, well, parents will see, who the problem really is. It's not the teachers, it's the parents, which I found really disappointing, to very quickly, in the vast majority of places, that spirit of cooperation and partnership like we have never seen before, So that really did give me a bit of a buzz.
Which links beautifully to my next question, Jackie. Look at you. And I think it is exactly that. And I think the challenge and the uncertainty provokes different things in people, and certainly people cope in different ways. We've mentioned, Natalie, you mentioned about the regulatory sort of implementations. Jackie, you mentioned the beginning of the year and those changes. What sort of surprised you in that whole initial implementation? Maybe Darren, you can kick us off here. In what surprised you in how people were handling it or what was happening within your school?
I think what surprised me was how quickly people can embrace change. As Margaret suggested, our school was, we were really moving forward to some sort of blended, learning options and things like that anyway. And so we've had this learning platform that for the last 2 years, it's, you have some champions and have these working committees and you, holy smokes, have a breakfast meeting and you, look, just try one thing and two things, and then all of a sudden within 3 days, they actually all of a sudden knew how to do everything. And I was like, wow, I will never do change the same way again. It's just going like, this is how we're doing it. Guess what? You got the weekend to get yourself sorted because on Monday, this is the new thing. So it really did surprise me just how really quickly people actually could change, and that was a surprise. And I also think I was surprised by just our families, just how open they were to a new way of doing school, and I thought that was really pretty cool, because I think most parents have a notion, because they've been to school themselves, they sort of have a thought on how school should operate, but no one's been to a digital school before, and so really there was no rules. And so I just surprised that just we had next to no pushback from like any parents at all, like in a school of 1,100 plus, it was really fairly smooth sailing. So those were the two things that surprised me.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people's debate, or a lot of the media argument, was, but hang on, regional schools or schools outside of metro are not going to be able to go online, and there's problems with that. Whereas you're saying parents actually, they were able to.
Yes, we had some of our more distant families, they don't have internet out where they were, so that was a problem to overcome, but we were able to do that in cooperation with them and worked around some of that. Yeah, all the kids at our school have a MacBook as part of your enrolment in our school. If you're in year 5 to 12, you get a MacBook. If you're in year 3 and 4, you get an iPad. We already had some other ones. We went ahead and got some more for where we were a little bit short in the K-1 space. So every student in our school had the digital device with all the school's softwares and programs that we needed them to have. So that didn't pose a problem for us. What posed a problem was our head of junior school getting on board with a technological approach to education, but we overcame that. We overcame that eventually. Hey?
I'm going to protect Margaret here and say no.
Well, the thing is, we all have our strengths, and while Darren openly says that technology is my strength, there are levels at our school, and I think Darren's is below mine.
Yes.
So we're open to admit that. But even the language that we're able to do things, and I did all my kindergarten enrolment interviews, for example, via Zoom. I remember the first one, I thought, gee, I hope this works, but now it's like Zoom, everyone's sick of the unmute. I still have to say that to parents. Even yesterday, someone said, this is my first enrolment interview, this is my first interview over Zoom, or this is my first interaction with Zoom. It's like, wow, what have you done all year? And so, yeah.
And isn't it interesting, because a lot of the pushback I had working in all the different school spaces is it won't work via Zoom. You can't connect with people. And I'm working with a lot of people in extremely poor wellbeing states, and yet it did work, and it was able, and we've seen that from those consults.
I think some people even preferred Zoom, and it looks at all the different personalities, and so you can engage some people who in a classroom, for example, weren't necessarily wanting to volunteer answers, and they were more vocal over Zoom because it suited their personality, or that when you break into a chat room or a breakout room, they felt that they could participate more, and there was a lot of the social awkwardness that they may have face-to-face in a classroom. Over Zoom it was fine. So.
Absolutely. Natalie, what about you? What was that surprise moment for you?
I would agree with Darren with all of that you've said there. I think some of the other things that came up that surprised me was how well the Year 12 staff managed, and not that they wouldn't, but there was obviously a lot of uncertainty for the kids in Year 12, and a lot of things where those students were, there was a lot of worry and a lot of concern about what would it look like, and there were no answers. We were just basically trying to work it out as we went through, and a lot of things were about trying to maintain consistency, and the common discussion all the time was, it's going to be okay, we're going to keep going forward as we were. We didn't change anything about assessments as in the schedule, we just changed some of the types of assessments. So that was part of what, it surprised me, and it really didn't, because it just meant the teachers quickly just pivoted in the space of, a week or so to go, okay, this is what's due, we need to make changes about what is the type of task, how does that fit in with the, scope and sequences and all the weighting requirements. And so it was quite
Because the
amazing.
irony of that is if you had a staff meeting, faculty's there, and you said, okay, what I want us to do is actually change up our assessment schedule, and I want us to look at our weightings. And if we had that meeting in week 5 of term 1,
It would make
It's
sense.
a meeting. Just
they just wouldn't have taken that.
No,
way.
100%. So, and
So
I think that
it's
was really
amazing.
part of the thing too with the staff and being able to really maintain that sense of the wrap around the year 12s, and it was really evident, I think, all the way through. And I'm sure every school did the same thing with the senior students. They just kept moving through, and there was the ability through all of the homeschooling thing to have. They felt like they were still learning and they were still progressing and doing the same value they would have got. Maybe not 100% the same as in a classroom, but even the other thing I wanted to add was just with our maths staff. And I think one of the things that our math staff are fabulous, and often they can be quite conservative about how you do things. It's often very much on the board, but literally in a week, they were upskilling themselves with iPads and being able to do that and capturing you need to be able to show solutions. You can't do that via Zoom. And so they were really upskilled, a lot in the space of a week, and being able to do, and that they now carry that forward in their classes, being able to do that on their iPads using the I don't even know what they're called, but thank you. And being,
Ask Darren, he knows.
I know.
so you know.
I've got to come up with something.
Yeah. So that upskill, and it was fabulous, and they're still using that. All those things are now resources that are online for kids to be able to use. So there's just so much that's been that I know it's a pandemic, and we shouldn't say that they're good things, but there have been so many wonderful things that have come out of what has not been a very good year for a lot of people. So.
And it is funny because I think those key comments around education, often people will say, well, it's very hard to change. We like our stability, we like our consistency of where we're coming and what we're doing, yet, as you say, because the core of what we're doing is the motivation to impact and help youth through that transition, it takes that change fear away from us, because actually it's about delivering. It's interesting, Darren and I both lived the life of a HSC parent this year, and so took it from both sides in terms of where it was, and I was surprised, and it's certainly year 12 is not the year that I'm that concerned about, because I think a lot of them were cared for in that.
And I think the only thing I'd say to that was that I really saw a lot of was the fact that I think teachers will do anything for their students. So if it means that you have to upskill in the space of 24 hours, they will do whatever is required for their students so that they do not miss out. And I think that was really evident. I'm not saying they don't do that any time, but I just think that's just the nature of teaching and teachers.
Yeah, and that leads nicely to a question we did get from our audience, which there's been talk of this for quite some time, but do we see or do we feel that there is a seismic shift away from that teaching culture to a learning culture? Doris, what are your thoughts on that?
I think in terms of that, learners should not be in terms of receiving information, I think learners, as in students, should be more engaged, and actually, I think the teaching culture is a very important aspect of the learning culture, if that makes sense. Because in terms of our school, we made it very explicit that explicit teaching was the most important thing to actually differentiate our students coming from gifted school, of gifted or highly selective school. We made sure that the teachers were actually explicitly giving explicit instructions, that the students had differentiated curriculum, that they were engaging in very extensive, high-level delivery type of work. So, for example, most of our teachers, I'm very impressed with some of the stuff that the teachers were doing. For example, they were engaging online experiments when they're actually going and actually presenting the experiment and running through it, and the students had to actually view it all through Zoom. That was impressive. And I think the explicit instruction is still there, and I think teachers need to have clear directions so that the students exactly know where and what they're learning. Because it shouldn't be like, for example, putting a whole set of work on Google Classroom and expecting the students to engage in that. It's rather boring. I think the students need to be challenged and engaged. So a lot of our teaching was very interactive, and there was a lot of discussion rather than just posting work on a weekly basis.
I totally agree, and I think it did give that opportunity to relook at what we do rather than going through what I normally do or approach. Margaret, did you have anything else from your side?
I think also we look at our students as learners, and sometimes it is too teacher heavy and focused, and so we saw a lot of our students, even the young ones, take responsibility for their learning. And so because they're engaging with it, I think part of it is what you're saying is the partnership with parents. It's not just a teacher there delivering it, the education, it's how can you engage these students and give them some agency into what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, when they want to learn it. So by putting it back on to the students, I think it really increased their great engagement level.
So a personal example of that, and then you're going to speak, right? Because you're in my boy's in year 9, so the group we all want to kick at home. And he quickly identified that if he could actually get through a whole lot of his tasks and activities, he said to me in day 1, so Dad, if I do that in 4 days, does that mean I get Friday off? Yes, mate, you do. What if I get through it in 3? You get 2 days off. The next thing you know, my son is awake at 7 o'clock in the morning on his computer, doing some of the stuff, then checking for his pastoral thing, then he went back to do some more. The best learning he's ever done in his years at school was actually during that whole period. And he would work from 7:30 in the morning to like 8 o'clock at night for 3 straight days and give himself 2 days off. He thought he was the best kid in the world, having a 4-day weekend. So it is interesting when they gain agency.
Absolutely. Belinda, did you have
I actually do have something to add to that. It goes with that whole waking up early to finish everything. Some of our boys like to actually have the sleep in. So having that flexibility to say, I'm going to sleep in a bit, but I'm going to still get all of my work done. And teachers caught on to that very, very quickly, that they didn't have to start their session with the Zoom, have instructions, here's the activity, off you go, I'll be online. That was the initial thought of how it would work. But that changed really, really quickly. And the amount of sharing that happened because teachers could say, this student in my class is doing this, is that what's happening in your class? And you saw that shift. Our teachers in our schools, I know this is probably not news to you, but teachers love to talk. They love to say, this is what my kids are doing in this classroom, this is what they're doing. So that whole sharing and then adapting really, really quickly, it happened. And what I really liked about it is it happened overnight. That whole idea of we don't need to go as slow as sometimes we think.
The thing I loved was it was a lot of the students that often teachers are going, I don't know how to get him, I don't know how to get her, they hate everything we're doing, I can't get them over the line sort of thing. Which does lead to the next question that the audience shared as well, which through this whole COVID period, do you think this is a sustainable thing? Will students be empowered to continue to learn themselves in a flexible, sort of collaborative way inside and outside of the classrooms at their pace? Maybe Mark, do you have any thoughts on that?
My first thought is that that's really complex because we're very structured industrially, curriculum-wise, parent expectation, capacity of students to do it. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. I think what is key, and I know that the work that we did was, what does the research say? And our first job as school leaders was to say, what is our learning framework going to be for as long as this goes on? And then what does the research say about it? And more over the last couple of years, I keep getting drawn back to Maslow and Bloom. And how do we apply that to the kids and how do we work that with the staff? So for some kids, autonomy and agency will look very different for others. And I think it's really important that we take all of this, and I think when there's opportunities to engage with academics to take the lessons away and link it back to research nationally and internationally is really important. And then make decisions that meet the needs of the kids, because there can't be one size fits all around that. And I guess that is the core of differentiation and how we do that. But I think what we have shown is incredible agility with teachers and students and parents to be able to do it. So not to avoid the question, but I think it's exciting. And I think that the key is for school leaders and stakeholders in schools to be very glass half full as much as we can. But I think as we head into the summer holidays, ensure that people have a chance to have a break. Because this pace is not sustainable. Despite the fact that everyone's done just a magnificent job. But it is exciting. Because I think things will be different.
It gives us the opportunity for that data and those findings.
And informed voice, because people have lived it, so you can have a really rich conversation linked in with evidence.
I think the other thing, whether we take it forward is really part of or whether we want to, or whether that's part of our decision making going forward. I think the danger is that it's happened, it's passed, and we go back to old ways. And I don't think that's the teachers who would choose that. I think that's the leadership. And I think the leadership in schools needs to be, I think, courageous in the going forward. And that's something, you know, we've talked about. You know, I think, you know, Darren's conversation, discussion about his son, you know, having his own decision about his learning. And one of the things that I would love to see is that, we've talked about this as targeting, you know, kids in year 9. What they learnt in that period of time was so much organisation, so much independence, and having to kind of manage themselves, that they don't learn that when they have to go through a school routine where we're the ones calling the shots. So what the challenge is, what I'd like to be thinking about is, you know, 1 day a week, year 9 work from, sorry, that's an alarm going off on my thing, is that 1 day a week that year 9, I'd love to see that is for a couple of terms a year, they work from home 1 day a week. The teachers keep their skills going, the kids have to keep their skill going, and you get a little bit of that kind of continuity in terms of the skills that we want them to take forward into year 11 and 12. The danger is that, they rose to the occasion. They're well and truly all over it. Took, you know, a day or so to get used to it, but kids, they adapt like that, and they'll adapt backwards if we leave it that way as well.
It is interesting because I see from that career transition, and a lot of what I've been noticing in the work we're doing with the students that are struggling in that transition and not clear on where they're going and not feeling that they're in control, is actually that sort of empowerment gives them the maturity that they have to learn how to learn independently. They have to learn how to deliver those.
They have to take charge of their learning.
And sometimes it just works so much better for them.
Because I think sometimes it's easy for kids just to sit in a classroom and just, you know, they're in the classroom and they don't have to be responsible for anything. Some do, but there are kids that don't want to, you know, they don't want to be part of that process. They just do what they need to do. So I think I think the way you structure the lessons that are at home.
So we've timetabled that in. We've
Yes.
timetabled in a day off a week for certain grades. We've timetabled
So
in
jealous.
flexible periods for other grades 7 to 10 as well. So they've got a couple of hour blocks where they get to choose. I think on the research thing, Mark, I think one of the things going to be interesting on that is that one of the times where you'll hear people reflect on, was it a successful time or not a successful time during that COVID lockdown time where we were explicitly learning from home. At the same time, I think what we also need to factor into that, which will be interesting to see if research shows, is that mum and dad were also at home full time. You couldn't go to the cinema, you couldn't play sport, you couldn't go to your friend's house, that you couldn't do anything. You were literally in your house. And so I think that's an unfair sometimes correlation to draw whether it's successful or not, because it actually wasn't ever trialled in a period of time where but then in the afternoon they could go to football training, they could go to dance class, they could go and see their friends on the weekend and learn and socialise and learn and socialise. They actually were just at home. And I don't think that the research will really ever factor that in really effectively, actually, because it wasn't just whether the learning was successful, it was all the other imposed restrictions on them, and the fear in the house, and mum and dad losing jobs, and them working out from home, and the stress in a house at that period of time, I think is possibly going to be a little bit unfair in the research as to whether...
Well, if it's only based on marks, that's going to be a problem as well, if that's the only measure.
Well, I think the thing with the research, though, is that like any research, good research is longitudinal. So we have to capture that moment. I agree with you, to take that snapshot of that point in time, but to take that snapshot over, and I think that's the encouragement for the profession, to engage with that, not to make those snapshots, but very different to what's happening in pockets of Western Sydney across the 3 sectors, compared to what's happening in the North Shore, compared to what's happening in rural and remote schools. So I take your point, but I think it's it'll be interesting.
Space to watch, and I think Natalie, that's a fair point. Is what are we measuring? Because often we'll measure academic data, but there's so much else. With Jackie, you would be seeing that.
Yeah, definitely. And so there's a few things that we're sort of seeing from the other. So I'm doing some of the research work in this area. But one of the things that we saw, which was I think, getting back to the original question, which is about empowering students and so on, we certainly saw a rise and continuing patterns of students getting together to learn socially and collaboratively. So when they were, in that lockdown situation, they were finding, all of a sudden, Snapchat, Twitter, all of the other chat functions, we've been spending years trying to get them away from those devices. Now we were saying, get into it, but using it for what they were, using it as a tool, not as necessarily a time waster, right? So I think that, where they were able to do that in a digital way, that was fantastic, and parents were encouraging them and they were seeing it working. The other thing too is that where they could see each other when restrictions were lifted a little bit and they were actually able to go and meet in small groups, they were doing that too. So they were taking that, that new approach to the social and collaborative learning a little bit further and back into real life, so to speak. The other thing too that I think is really interesting is that when schools were making that shift initially to digitally, there was that oh my God moment, and we had to move to replicating everything in Zoom, right? So once that stopped, there were two types of schools, really two camps. One where the wheels completely fell off because the kids then went from very structured times to no structure and not as much structure or different structure. And without the school, and the students that thrived, where it's all has been working really well for them, is when they were either, the school helped them with developing those structured plans, or they either gave them, made suggestions for them, or they were developed with their parents. Okay, so there was that negotiation. So you're talking about your child, your fellow negotiating his time. Awesome. I'd love to see where he goes. He's going places, that kid. Those really work. So those are really sort of the two schools, and there's still some schools, school communities that are struggling with that. Even though they've returned to school, they're still struggling with the fallout from not having the structure when they were at home. So I don't think that, I think it's sort of incumbent on us really, talking about the research. Yes, we've had that big sort of blip period this year. It's not going away. It's not going away. So you're still going to have schools shut down for 2 days for the deep clean. We're still going to have, potentially, areas being, everyone told to go home. We're not going to be travelling anytime soon. I'm not sure about you, but I'm not keen on a vaccine that's been whipped out by, a few places in a matter of months. These things, this is going to be around for a while. And we know, if you know anything about, emergency planning and logistics around, around security, the governments have got plans sort of 5 to 10 years out that this isn't going to be going away anytime soon. But it's not just this. It could be anything else that happens that leads us to this point. So that was just some interesting things that are happening. But I think too, the manic busyness, that period or that state of manic busyness that we were in prior to COVID, right, came to a grinding halt. And parents and the kids are really reluctant, even though things have opened back up again, people are really reluctant to get back into that crazy busyness again. So it's going to be really interesting. I don't think it's necessary to load up every minute of the day for kids. I think that we've learnt that there's a huge amount of value in downtime, in just being slow, in being bored, and having time just to stop and appreciate family life, family time. That has been a huge bonus, I think.
It's fascinating.
We want to keep it. We want to keep those good things, yeah.
And it was a fascinating moment where even when I saw around my area, kids were suddenly sliding down hills on cardboard boxes and playing cricket in the street and things like that, which was going back in time almost for that free play. Margaret, the junior school space was one that a lot of people said, oh, they can't learn independently, you can't do this remote, a lot of negative noise about it. What was your experience in that? Do you see that this is sustainable, or how?
Well, I think parts of it are sustainable. I think to say that it can't work, we've proved that it can work. So it's just what methods and measures do we put in place to make sure it works. It works a bit easier when you've got a bit more parental support, especially with the younger grades. So it was an interesting kindergarten year, but really, even when the children came back, one of the things that the teachers were saying is it's actually really impressed with that they were able to watch their movies that the teachers were creating. They were able to access books that were made available digitally, and they're able to use the structure that we put in place to work through quite a lot of the content. It also it made us think, okay, what parts of the curriculum do we need to prioritise? We're just not going to replicate what we've done. We need to reduce the length of some of these lessons so that we can engage the children. We're going to have a variety of zooming in so they can maintain connection with their teacher, because at the young age, the teacher is their idol, someone who they really admire. But it's also how do we do wellbeing? So and that looks different for everybody. So we'd have the teachers' aides as well as, and we wouldn't normally have teachers' aides doing wellbeing. The teachers' aides would Zoom families, Zoom students, and just making sure that they maintain connection. So look, I think that's something that I'm really proud of the team for what they did. Again, it's also not just the learning. In junior school, it's the whole experience. We're laying solid foundations, but we have a lot of fun on the way. So what do we do strategically for their wellbeing? So our assistant head of junior school, she was creating videos that, she's very, very vivacious Canadian. She'll say, "Good morning, junior school," and she'd be, where am I today? What am I doing? And so what are some of those things that took a lot of time that really had lots of bang for their buck?
It was a bit of a power of the pause moment, wasn't it? In what is critical in the curriculum and what is critical in the family. And gee, we've been spending all this money on these activities. Do we really need those activities? Are there other ways we can do it? And I guess a number of you have commented on that how we were working through the school and what leadership there was. Natalie, how did you adjust your leadership through this time?
I thought about this question and I kind of thought, I don't think there was an adjustment to the leadership in the terms of like how we do things. I think that as a result of it, it required probably extra levels of communication, extra levels of checking and in at the different middle managers particularly. So I know there's a question later on about wellbeing, but certainly some of the areas in the school around the diverse learning students and things like that. So there were the kids that we knew that the staff were looking after, and that there was obviously the connection, whatever. And I think in the leadership role, it was which areas are there going to be potential gaps that are going to open up, where we have to be very clear on covering every kid in the college and all of the different scenarios for the different families that could be there. So I think in the leadership thing, you just become hyper aware of areas where in this situation that's unusual, that you have to kind of be over the top of even more. So I think in terms of the area of our kids with diverse learning needs, that was an area where they're the kids that were potentially going to be more at risk than anything else, and they were the kids that possibly it was more difficult for parents to support them, because there are a lot of things that the teachers are able to do to support those kids. So, we looked at different ways to manage that, and obviously the other things were the kids who were our wellbeing kids, who were issues around, anxiety and other mental health issues. So they were areas that we got the academics, and I think that was okay, but what other areas were they that we needed to keep our eyes on?
I think that communication piece in the middle manager and that sort of level is something that we say we focus on, but maybe we had to think differently about. We had to
100%, I agree.
The effective nature of it.
Yeah.
Mark, what about for you?
I think communication was absolutely key to the whole thing. When you touched on earlier, what could we control? You'd argue nothing, because you can't one up. But shifting that thing, what can we influence? And I think that's key for schools, whether it's in a pandemic or not. We can strongly influence curriculum delivery. We can strongly influence quality teaching and learning every day. We can strongly influence wellbeing, and we can provide that wraparound. And that was our go-to. What does the research say around effective schools? What does it say around turnaround schools? What does it say around startup schools? Because that was in our senior executive meeting on the big day that we mapped out the framework and the learning framework. If you were starting a brand new school, which we were, what do you need to do? You need to make it tight. So that flexibility that our really, really talented teaching staff had, they still had that, but it was tighter than it was because we hadn't taught distance ed, and we shifted into that. So, but I just think communication was key. And I know in the department it's big system, 2,200 schools, but they were sending out emails with all the important updates, and they were landing at 9 o'clock, sometimes 10 o'clock, but you'd wait for it to land because you had to get that information out. And sometimes it was late, but it was about saying to parents, we know these are late, and maybe don't wait for it, but it will be there. And I know at our school, the feedback was really really positive,
Yeah.
because they knew that we were going to take it, distill it down to, and contextualise it,
Yep.
and make an informed decision.
Yep.
And on a regular day, I often say, as wonderful as they are, never ever let 14 and 15-year-olds do your PR, ever. You have to control the narrative, and this was just a case under the microscope, and that really drove our work.
It's interesting because often we'll hear there's over communication, but in this situation there was a lot of information, there was a lot of communication, but people were actually appreciating it.
Yes.
So I think it was something that consistency of message and the timeliness, and even if it was in the middle of the night, people were quite grateful to be, okay, so that's where we are. There's that comfort in the discomfort.
And we were saying to people as well, we know that these emails that we're sending, they're too long. We know that.
Yeah.
Don't feel obliged to read it, but what we're providing is if you want to read it and you need to know to get to sleep, go for it. But if you don't want to read it, you know where to find it. And you've still got choice. It's a differentiated message despite the fact that it's all there, and the community was really responsive, because you're mindful that in our context you're leading a community of 3,000 people, all with different needs. Am I going to travel? I don't want to catch the train. So we regularly said, we respect and accept that decision, because you weren't going to go to war with parents over putting kids on trains. You just had to go with it, and we had some of those things, but it was consistent messaging, and I did that because you talked to the deputies, but it had to be consistent because it couldn't jump. It just had to be on message the whole time. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting comment on that on message, but also where we're coming from for schools. We've all obviously got a strategy we're meant to be delivering to, and these 3 and 5 year plans and best laid plans as they are. Reflecting on that lockdown period and when things really were up in the air and completely in a new phase. Darren, did you adjust your strategic plan or your intent there?
Yep. Yeah. So I really quite struggled with my leadership during that time, to be honest with you. I'm very, very much in and amongst the people, and I'm rubbing shoulders with kids and in class every day. That's where my happiest place is, rather than sitting there reading a policy or writing some new document. And so I really struggled by not having people around. And so that also flowed through then into that strategic plan. And at the end of last year, we'd revised what the goals were for this year, and I didn't go completely out the window, but they definitely took a back seat.
Yeah.
And so that's made the end of the conversations at the end of this year for next year really quite interesting, because your PD for the year is aligned to what your goals you're trying to achieve, and you have sort of different markers along, and they just completely just got put on hold for an entire year. So we've got new staff in our school who staff with us for 4 or 5 weeks, and then all of a sudden they're off on their own, and they're not part of our culture yet. They haven't really worked out how we like to do things, etc., etc. And everything that we would normally do really well just got put on hold. And so it does feel like we've been put back a little bit on that time. What it's done is just refocus what we will do moving forward in regards to, we've always had sort of innovative approaches to education. This has just given us a little bit more of a push along and an impetus to go in possibly some slightly different directions in regards to timetabling and delivery of curriculum and things like that. So we have made adjustments there.
So potentially the vision is still there, but the execution of it is very...
and those things were potentially another few years away.
Yeah.
It's actually just sped some areas up and slowed some other areas down.
Mike, what about for you?
I would agree with that. Really, essentially, what you captured in terms of, we still delivered. I think, I'm so proud of what they did. That reciprocity between all of the stakeholders was key. But what we did do, and we saw this really early on, was to harness that opportunity to drive technology. And where we were lucky, because we've been planning this in sort of September, October, we really want to go to the next level, and then this happened, but we still started thinking, well, what's good out of this? Well, what is good? I really think we got about a decade's worth of growth in that period of time, and we couldn't, even with an unlimited PL budget and reduced face-to-face, so that's been fantastic. But when I was talking before, the focus was on teaching and learning, and it looked different, but they did an outstanding job. It was really good, and we did look at things, and I'm not sure that our kids will be at school 5 days a week in 5 years' time. We're not ready to take that leap just at the moment, because I don't think the community is there. But and for us in department schools, we're in the final year of our current school plans before we shift over into our new strategic improvement plans. That will be 4 years in duration. So almost it was perfect, because we got to finish the last one, think really deeply in the situational analysis, which is the framework the department's got, and where do we go next. So we're just going to go positive, but let's not do it again. But it was really good.
For different reasons.
Yeah,
maybe.
absolutely.
And you've touched on the technology piece, and a question that came from the audience and a number of people asked about this is, well, what lessons can be achieved with our experiences with online technology? So we really did get thrown in the deep end in terms of educating future generations, so instead of taking this forward. So Margaret, maybe you can kick us off there.
I think in a few ways, on a parent level, the connection that we were able to provide with the families through the different devices and methods that we were communicating with them was amazing. And one of our aims and visions for this year was to roll out progressive reporting with the view of making a stronger connection with the families. But by all of us going with the technology, we were able to put that they're learning daily, multiple times daily in their face. So for us, that is one of the biggest bonuses of, a silver lining of COVID, is the way that we've embraced technology to connect with parents, but also for the students. So just maximising the use. As Darren mentioned, we've got iPads that we share from kindergarten to year 2, but each year 3 and year 4 student has their own iPad. But just maximising what that looks like. So rather than just using it, a couple of times a week, how do we use it each day to really enhance the learning that they're doing? So because it's now second nature to them, it's just like as much as picking up a pencil and writing. It's okay. We could do this on an iPad. We could just do presentations that we've done previously in one format, or we could digitise that. We could do this, and the students became so much more familiar with the technology that's improved their learning.
Linda, what about you?
Well, we had the added benefit this year of changing the actual learning management system all at the one time. So it was wellbeing, it was curriculum, it was everything rolled out during COVID time. So we were upskilling staff how to use it, upskilling parents how to use it, upskilling students how to use it, all while they were actually at home. So that was amazing. So everyone can do it. So even those staff that get really nervous about those new systems, and there was lots of comparison. I'm not going to say they took it with a smile, because there was lots of, the other system worked really well. But they did, that we able to bring out the reporting system, like that happened semester 2. So that new report templates, new way of actually assessing students, everything was put on this platform. So technology was huge, but also using those platforms of online learning, we had a number of students, and I think you touched on that before, that didn't come back to school straight away because of their own personal circumstances. So either it was they had people at home that were at risk, so they weren't ready to come back to school. And so teachers were doing that blended type of learning where they've got students in front of them, but yet there's still students at home. And the IT that we had for that, so yes, Google Classroom was a perfect platform, so you could upload information for kids to do, but you could still keep Zoom happening in the background. My Year 12 class, I had 2 students at home, so they were on Zoom and you could see their little faces in the corner while I was teaching. So they were still part of the classroom. They typed in the chat if they had a question, and they did the whole, hey, what you doing? in that. So there was that still social interaction, especially for those 2 students who were still at home and they couldn't come back for most of term 2.
Yeah. And I think that glimpse into the rest of the world of those students' lives is really huge. I know from my own daughter's experiences, they had people where their own family lives were so complex, and the school knew it was complex but didn't know the degree. And by being on Zoom and having the little brother pop in and do this and this happening in the background there and all these other things, it just gave us a better understanding of the reality of that child's world, and I think that then allowed us to really tap in with what was going to help them and how that was going to continue. Jackie?
Sorry, I was just going to continue on from here. The benefit is the online platform learning management system is not just during that COVID period, but it's beyond. So my son's been off school for the last month, and he will be off for another school for another couple of weeks. He's been zooming into his classrooms. The work he uploads, he gets it downloaded from a teacher. They'll email. So all of that is great, but then the next one we're just thinking in different ways. So yesterday we zoomed into our sister school in India, and that's because when I got back to school this week, some of the Year 4s decided they'd like to do a fundraiser. And so I said, well, let's have a chat to the people who we're fundraising it for. Let's find out exactly what we're going to be using. And in India, they're still in lockdown and still using remote devices, and that's what Year 4 wanted to raise money for. So the guy that we deal with there, he had his family there, and so his children were interacting with our Year 4 students. Now, we wouldn't have thought about doing that last year, you know, to the extent, well, oh, that's just dull in India. You know, it just makes it, you could have sworn that they were talking to a movie star because I was speaking to these people in India, and it just, like, they will remember that, and that should become part of our way of thinking. Well, we don't need to have these countries that are so far away. We have them right in, come to my office, let's dial up. So it's just another way of thinking that we need to incorporate into our daily lives.
So Margaret says that her boy's been off, yeah? Just give you a little plug for Margaret, who I love here. Her boys in Year 10 had major heart surgery. And so normally, if you're a Year 10 boy and you're off with something like that, that's your learning is just, it wouldn't have occurred, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a teacher would send over a textbook or some paper copies, whereas now this young fellow who really values learning after major surgery can actually continue on, and that's where the benefit has actually flowed through now into actual sort of real world experiences, not just COVID experiences. And I think that's been a beautiful thing.
I suppose the challenge going forward is how do we get the balance right for teachers, because you know, we got to be, the blended learning works, but it's another layer of additional requirement for teachers, and how do we get that right? You know, maybe we have to give them one less class to be teaching, and the load shifts to be able to support that going forward. We can't just keep layering on top.
So leading on from that then, how were you able to focus, or what do you think is critical in terms of focusing on wellbeing in your school?
So if we look at the two aspects, I suppose if I'm focusing on the wellbeing of staff, I mean, part of the really the important conversation is the feedback from staff and listening. So what forums do you have? How do we get the feedback? How do we actually hear what they've got to say? And even though, you know, there are things, and I regularly say in a leadership meeting is like, you know, we don't teach a full load, right? So you cannot just assume that this can be done, or we can add another layer on when we haven't taught a full load for many of us for many years. So I think it's really important to always be thinking about the people who are, you know, full load is, I don't think I want to go back to a full load. I know how much it takes for teachers. So I think the wellbeing of staff, and then what is our process around supporting that, and how do we provide the time to support what is needed going forward. And I'm not an independent school. We have quite tight parameters around those things. And so, you know, expanding budgets and having money to do that is not always possible. So we've got to look at ways to do that creatively with the time we've got. And I think with the students, I think that's the other thing is, I think, you know, the wellbeing, I think we've already spoken about some kids absolutely loved working from home. They thrived. And now we're dealing with those kids having to come back into mainstream school, and they're the ones that we're still struggling with to get back into the normal routine. And other kids actually really struggled with being at home. So it's created quite an interesting kind of, you know, range of things. I know our psychologist school are absolutely inundated for the months afterwards, and still are now, just trying to kind of get on top of it. But it's been a very interesting dynamic what it's created, not just the mental health, but obviously, you know, the kids who've probably never been on our radar, because it hasn't been something that's probably been an issue for families, and so.
It's interesting because when we talk about wellbeing in schools, so often we talk about student wellbeing, and we focus on student wellbeing programs, and we talk about, and exactly as you have rightly said, how we're protecting, supporting, creating facilities, everything for our students, yet the wellbeing of our staff is so directly impacted. Too. And Jackie, we do a lot of that work with Wellbeing Australia because
we certainly do.
And we're all about technology.
But I'd just like a comment here too. I think that the wellbeing is also connected to that equity issue as well. And we certainly saw starkly that there were that whole access to technology, etc., was a big a burden. You know, it's a big challenge. It's a big burden too for schools and for families. You know, who were saying, well, you know, how do I make this happen for my child, or, you know, in some cases, you know, a number of children in the family. But I do think that, you know, we've got to address it, but not having the technology is not an excuse to not be able to plan for these sorts of events or change the way we're doing our delivery going forward. Now, it may surprise you, but I am old enough to remember being in school and teaching in schools where we didn't have the technology. You know, I was just super excited when I got an overhead projector.
Some people won't know what that is. And you put some pictures up.
I always put it upside down.
And Natalie and I actually worked together in an establishment, an institutional, educational institution many years ago. And when I left there, which wasn't all that really that long ago, I was still using a chalkboard.
Wow.
Okay, so that was terribly exciting. Getting the whiteboard was awesome.
So much cleaner.
That's right. That's right. But there were lots of schools who were in that situation, not chalkboard situation, but definitely in lack of technology situation. And you know, we've done blended learning before without the technology. You know, so we can do it again. So we need to plan for that. And I know some little schools that I was working with in regional Victoria who were doing the work packs, you know, who were mainly for they were little primaries for most of the time, and they were creating the work packs, and the teachers, God love them, were driving around and dropping them at the gate for the kids. The kids were super excited, waiting for the little parcel to come along. There was always a little surprise in the packet as well. But the thing was that it was then a phone call. You know, phone call was a technology that they did have access to, but they were actually working in in partnership with parents to actually make this happen. So just crying out and saying can't do it because we don't have the money and the technology, I'm sorry, that's just not an excuse. There are matters of justice that need to be carried out there, but we need to be moving forward, and that is that I think is actually going to impact on wellbeing going forward.
Big corporate stepped up for that too. It was very quick. Big corporate stepped up and said, we've got these, we can hand over. So that it was very quick to take that. Doris, what about for you guys?
At our school, we normally have a wellbeing cohort meeting every fortnight with kids from 7 to 10. And during that time, the students were actually completing Google form, their check-ins, wellbeing check-ins, where we can identify students and actually case manage individual students. So when they actually complete it, either Year Advisor's deputy will actually run through every student and see if there's any particular ones that we need to reach out and support. And besides from that, we also created a learning and wellbeing hub for students and parents where they can have a look at different sorts of activities that were on that Google site, because during the lockdown they couldn't go out. So I created virtual reality tours where they can actually on their phone or put their goggles, virtual reality goggles on, and basically go on tours. Say for example Eiffel Tower, so go overseas, Mars. They can meditate, do physical workouts, like Zumba. There's all sorts of activities online which they can engage in for their own well-being, social, physical and mental well-being. So they're really things that we've done at our school level to ensure that the students' well-being have been met.
Popping to Mars for the day, that's a great idea. Darren.
So wellbeing is a massive piece for us and has always been a massive piece, and it was really interesting that at the start of the year I'd actually signed us up to be the first school in Australia to use Educator Impact, who do sort of reviews. They actually had a wellbeing pulse, and so I was signed up as the first school in Australia to pilot this, and the next thing you know we go into a lockdown, and they've got this incredible Pulse app is what it's called. Educator Impact Pulse is just amazing device and tool, and we continue to use that today across the entire school. It's outstanding. I can't recommend it highly enough. I think one of the other things, like there's so much to talk about in that wellbeing space, right? One of the things that I was really pleased with was that the teachers in our school have a homeroom of about 14 students, and sometimes, the idea on that is that it's actually called pastoral care, right? In our class, that's your pastoral care class. And you sometimes wonder how much of it is pastoral care as opposed to pastoral admin. If they're turning up, they've got the right uniform, do they know what announcements are going on, etc. And actually the care aspect in there sometimes, possibly gets lost in translation a little bit. My gosh, when kids were at home, that was pastoral care. the teachers were genuinely going, how are you doing today? What are you doing today? What's this and that? And they did things like that. Okay, we can't travel anywhere, so tomorrow everyone's got to say, bring us where would you travel if you could, you know? And it was a pet day and this, and just the level of care that went into the students and the care, the involvement from the kids in pastoral care was better than what it is at school. Like, it's our first period, we've played around all over the place where it works best, and oftentimes kids will turn up late, you know, it's asked, pastoral, whatever, right? That one, they were not missing. And it was just incredible how much they engaged in that space, and it really highlighted the importance of relationships in that space. And so our teachers did a really great job of making sure that that was really a special time every day for the kids. But the Pulse app is excellent. The other interesting thing that happens is that I do staff appraisals every year, and this year, really, really apologetically, every teacher I said, okay, so how have you coped this year? You know, it's been an incredible year. How have you gone? And they sort of look at me and they go, I've actually had an excellent year. Like, I've actually really loved it. And it's like they almost feel guilty for saying how much they've actually really enjoyed the year. Because of how much they've learned, opportunities they've had to do something different. They've got this real sense of achievement, that they've actually, wow, I've learned this and I've learned this and I've never done that before, and wow, I was able to achieve that. And I'm really proud of myself in that context. They felt highly supported, and so many staff have actually reported back in their annual appraisal just how much they've actually loved it, which has been really exciting to hear in that. And so I do think there's some things that schools can do in that space. Like so you talked about the students liking to sleep in. So one of the things that we did as our approach to online learning is there was like a call centre. So someone from every faculty had to be online from 7 o'clock in the morning, and we made it till 9:30 at night, knowing that some kids actually wanted to sleep in and actually wanted to do their learning afternoon and evening. And so we had some teachers going, how good was that my day didn't start till 10 o'clock? And I was happy to be on the call centre at 9 o'clock at night if some kid wanted to ring in. That's when I'm at my best. And so they actually loved the fact that their working hours almost suited in with them, right? Because there was others who go, well, I don't want to be there because I've got young kids and I'm up at 5 o'clock. Okay, your day's done by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was really excellent that we were able to do that with staff in that context as well. So it's been an interesting year, wellbeing-wise.
It's that human piece though, isn't it? Because we say that, you know, some of the students like to sleep in. We're actually just grown-up children. We've got that same thing. Some of us prefer the morning, some prefer that, and so it did really play to that. So you've all touched on a few things that you've trialled, or things that happened, and initiatives that you sort of implemented. So thinking about that whole educational approach, what do you think is maybe one or two, just in the sake of time, new initiatives that you're thinking, I want to carry those forward? And maybe Belinda, you can kick us off.
One of the things that we included with our pastoral care was we actually invited parents to join that morning session, the admin time. It was taken up more by the junior students, year 7, 8, more than anything, but that's something that we've never done before. You've always done homeroom or pastoral care in the morning, and it's just your students, and yes, it can be pastoral admin, but there's some teachers that are very good at making, and it's their priorities, making those relationships. Why not include the parents? That's something that happened because we felt the need to keep parents in the loop, and it happened naturally. That's something that we've never considered about continuing on. I know Nat's big on, but I'll let Nat explain a bit about getting the students to come to. You touched on it earlier about having students staying at home maybe once a week or once a fortnight in a term or things like that.
I think the other things to add to that too, which we'll take forward, is parent-teacher interviews on Zoom were absolutely amazing. The feedback from parents was amazing, and the same with the feedback with the teachers. It was just fabulous, so we're going to keep that. And P&F meetings on Zoom, fantastic. You can get a broader range of people there. And then some of the parent information nights that we had were not obviously face-to-face, so we created these great screencasts, and we just did the same thing, and we sent those out to parents, and we just followed those up with a Q&A session via Zoom. So, you know, they're things that we want to think about. I mean, don't want to lose the face-to-face, but where can you reduce the time factor? We're in the city, so a lot of parents have it's a travel issue, you know, so, and it also means things around families where you've got mum and dad aren't together, you know, being able to go to the P&F meeting, and they're sort of, you know, they're both connected, but they're also same with the parent-teacher interviews, that both can be there, and it creates a little bit less awkwardness that can happen. So there's been some great things.
It's interesting because a lot of parents that don't normally get there have
Yes.
said, I finally got more information on this in the Q&A sessions. Well, I got to hear about that, so it really did give us that chance.
And the thing about the Q&A sessions is that you can't go home, like at least with a screencast we send that out, you can go back and look at it 10 times if you want.
Yes.
You just can't, you know, that's a sort of 1 hour snapshot that you have. So there were some things that, you know, not sure whether we'll throw everything out, but there's more efficient ways for us to be delivering information and more consistently. And I think, you know, for the parents, there's lots of really good ways for that to
Accessibility,
happen.
really.
Mm.
What about Doris? Sorry. Did you?
I was just going to say, in a similar way, with even some of the events like Kindergarten Orientation Day, we did
Yeah.
the webcast. But what do we actually strip everything back that we've done? What's our purpose of that? And that is to give the students an insight, knowing that they can't come on site, give them an insight into what the school is like, but also how we teach. So this year we really ramped it up because we had the online information session, but for our students, each one of the kindergarten teachers over the last 4 weeks, we've sent home links of the new incoming teachers reading stories, so they can watch those over and over again. We've continually got emails on, oh, this is amazing, I can't believe that you're doing this. And then we also sent home a link of a virtual tour of the school and sort of where the children would go in kindergarten, sort of running them through, and the teachers then got an insight in, the parents got insight into some of what the lessons would look like. Now this is far more than we've ever done in Kindergarten Orientation Day, because they'd come for a few hours, come for a mocked up session, and it really, they didn't get such an insight. So we've learnt that the things that we've spec'd into this, it's in a different way, but it's given like it's far greater insight, and it's much more beneficial because they can continue to watch this over time. And procedurally, things like kiss and drop, you know, that taught especially the little ones resilience, and so we were having battles with parents. Look, I can't possibly drop my child here and, you know, kiss here and go. But that's something that is so streamlined now, and it's really reduced the amount of anxiety separation disorders that we had in the morning, because of just the way that the parents had to drop and go.
Yeah,
So,
no choice.
yeah.
Doris, did you have anything to add on those new initiatives you would
Yeah, definitely. In terms of parent-teacher night, I think continuing with that on Zoom, our feedback from parents were very high. Majority, I think about up to 90% actually preferred it on Zoom. So, because we actually did a survey and it came back very positive. And I think the feedback was to travel was the thing, and confidentiality, the fact that, you know, they don't hear other people talk about other kids, and they just don't want other people to hear about what, you know, the teacher has to say about their kid, positive and negative. And also the wellbeing hub that I was mentioning before, definitely going to continue with that. We have co-curricular, we're big on co-curricular at our school, so our prefects, wellbeing prefects are going to be looking at that and actually putting up more information. The latest thing that we put up was Are You Okay? And promoting that, so mental health, and also Care and Connect. So we're going to definitely be big on that. So we're definitely going to be continuing with that particular, and so that they know where to reach out for help and support. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I think that parent engagement piece is quite a huge one. You've touched on a number of things there. Jackie, did you have?
So I've actually got two things that are really exciting from all of this. The first one, I just want to just continue that conversation about parent-teacher meetings. I think that one of the things that has happened with, I'm a huge advocate for parent homeschool meetings. So actually teachers going to the homes, and I know that that's met with a fair amount of resistance in this country, but can I just say I do a fair bit of work in the US, and that's huge, right? So that's a big thing. I'd love to see more of it here, but hey, COVID, thank you very much. We have homeschool visits actually happening. We've got the home landscape and the school landscape, and we've got that hard border happening. But wonderful thing about Zoom is we're creating this new space, right? This new space that parents who have perhaps felt uncomfortable about coming to the school still have the comfort of being in their environment, and being able to meet. So what it's actually done, it's actually democratised that whole process, and it's got rid of what might be possibly unintentional and possibly intentional power imbalances, but that certainly has taken that away. So I've been doing a fair amount of PD in that area here in Australia, and that's sort of one of the things that's come out, is that it actually leads to deeper conversations, more relevant parent engagement, happening. And if you think of parent engagement as being a bit like an iceberg, what you see above the waterline is really not what's going on. And so I think as educators we've often had we've had some presuppositions about what parent engagement actually is, and now we're starting to really fully appreciate that there is an awful lot of parent engagement going on, and it hasn't exactly looked the way we thought it should look, but we're certainly having conversations now that are shining a light on the support and the engagement and the interest that's going on at home. The other thing that I think is really exciting from all of this too is and it's happening on projects that I'm working actually on again in the US. Thank God for technology, otherwise my work wouldn't be happening. But where we've actually got schools that are rethinking what they're going to do with their physical spaces. So along the lines of some of the stuff that Natalie and Belinda were talking about, where they're actually looking to amalgamate physical sites, so getting rid of some of the physical sites that they've got, and repurposing or reimagining their school day, reimagining who comes on site on what day, looking for increased enrolments on existing sites, so more utilising the resources, the physical resources that they've got better, and it's not school in shifts. The school day still proceeds as the school day, but we are really making some huge changes around the delivery of the curriculum. So that's really quite exciting, because when you look at a pool of finite funds, but it doesn't matter what sector you're in, whether it's across all sectors, there's a pool of finite funds for these capital works. Let's reimagine what we can do with what we've got, and that's what we're doing on quite a large scale, particularly in Florida at the moment. So I'm hopeful that this sort of thing will translate here, but again, it's a regulatory thing where it's saying kids have to be in school from this time to this time. And, it's all legislated, and certainly legislated at a state level, and I think there's some really exciting things that can happen. But can I just say, if we don't start having the conversation now and showing that best practice, the legislators are not going to move in time, right? So I think, you're talking about what do you control, what can you control? If you think about it being a fishbowl, right? The fishbowl you can't stop, right? That's the physics of your situation. What you can do is change the culture of the water. So let's change the culture of the water, because I think there's some huge opportunities that we've shown that we can actually do right now.
And it did show how quickly the legislation can change when it is required.
Oh,
And
amazing.
So all that, but we must go through and we must negotiate. Suddenly that all was a very quick process.
It evaporated. All of the hurdles evaporated very quickly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark, from that parent piece, because I think that we do look at schools a lot we've talked a lot about that student impact, that teaching impact, those aspects. We've touched on some of those parent moments of the parent-teacher interviews and potentially the orientation and those sorts of things. How do you think this has influenced and impacted that parent engagement piece?
So as Doris mentioned, our parents said straight away, don't ever go back to face-to-face, which is good for us. It's actually good for staff, because they can log off at 8 or whatever time it finishes. So that's all really good. All of them. Look, I think we were probably doing 25 to 30 nights a year, and they will continue, but they're not an extra hour later for travel. So that's a really big thing. When I think about what comes next with parents, they will rely on us even when we get back next year in ways that they don't even realise just yet. And we look back at maybe some of the impacts around the GFC and some of the other big sort of hiccups that have happened over the last couple of decades. I think JobKeeper has been fantastic. But when that starts to evaporate, we will get a true sense of how communities really are. And we know that when recessions hit, here in Australia, and we're really fortunate, we've got a fantastic safety net. I think regardless of where you sit politically, Australia has done remarkably well. But I think we will see the true test. And we just need to be ready for that, to look after those young and vulnerable people. I'm feeling a sense at the moment that Year 7 aren't in the spot that they would normally be in, because they haven't had the full experience. So we're doing some surveys at the moment, and we finish each term with some really fun events. And parents have said, you really need to have some fun events. And I thought, you're a Year 7 parent because you haven't seen it. But that's a good reminder, because they're not quite there. And Year 12 was always going to be really well looked after, but we need to be very cognizant about what happens with Year 11, having just obviously started the HSC for 21, and even going back, where are we at with Year 10, and then how do we navigate those parents through, because they haven't gone through the orthodox journey that everyone else has for decades on end. But I'm very cognizant about, and it might not happen, but when JobKeeper is probably due now to disappear in March, we just need to be on the alert to make sure that everyone is respected and that their dignity is maintained regardless of where they are. And who knows what that will look like, but I'm just being aware of that.
I think it's a good reminder that there's a lot of talk at the moment of can't wait for the new year, can't wait for new year. It's like this magic fairy dust is going to sprinkle and everything's going back to how it was. And it's very much not.
And we're in a very privileged position, I think, regardless of what sector we work in. Our jobs are very secure. We're not small businesses, and there's other, and I know people have family members and other things, but there are times I think teachers go, oh yeah, and I think, but your pay is still coming every fortnight or every month, and that's okay. But just being very aware, I think, is.
It's an interesting conversation because my husband works in a school, and my year 12 daughter, we were having this conversation about how her year has been quite different to my daughter who's in second year uni, who literally overnight was locked in the house, has not seen anyone, has not been in front of people, has barely socialised, and really her whole world turned on a coin. She was working full time, she was at uni full time, the world was perfect, and then it shifted. And we were saying to our year 12 daughter, you actually haven't noticed what's happening because your norm was continuing. You were still there at school, you were still continuing in your regular practice. And so it's interesting to watch that transition now as she's moving out, because there are big changes and everything's not going to shift. Darren, did you have anything to add on that?
Oh, I've got plenty to add, but I'm not short of a word, Catherine. You told me to keep myself short tonight. I'll do my best. I'm on
And that
behaviour.
and we could talk for hours, all of us could talk for hours. So I'm very, very conscious of time, and I guess in summary, I just really wanted us to have an opportunity to highlight and to think about, well, everyone's talking about these new norms, the new norms in education, the new norms in society. What is this magic new norm, which I personally have an issue with, but it is the language we're hearing. So thinking about education, what are those new norms you would each like to see? What's one wish list you would like to see? Maybe Doris, you can kick us off.
I think continuing with a bit of blended learning, that would be great, because we've come so far, and just to continue the skills that we have with the teachers and just delivering quality teaching. I think blended learning definitely.
Beautiful. Natalie?
Continued use of just the skills that we've learnt, so continue the momentum of where we're up to. That's pretty much what I think is what I hope for. So.
Beautiful. Jackie?
I think that hoping that things are going to go back to the way they were is just not a strategy at all for anyone at any time, any place now. I think we've finally got school and the real world work actually kind of mirroring each other now. I don't know about you, but I've still got everybody working from home. There's still a queue at the coffee machine in the kitchen. I'm not happy. However, I think we need to keep that agility happening, because that's the world they're going to be moving from into very quickly. And I think all of the talk we've had for years about the leadership and management in business saying we can't have people working from home. Well, guess what? They can, right? They can. Not only that, they're going to be working remotely. They're going to be working in rural and remote rural areas. People are leaving the cities. It can happen. We can do that. These are skills we've got to have people actually learning, and I think school should mirror that in some way.
Yes. And aren't the businesses loving it now, because they're looking at the cost efficiency of it, they're looking at the productivity of it, and so you've got companies that are still 10% of staff max back in the office, and they're going, oh, all this empty space we could be getting rid of.
And they are doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Margaret?
I think to continue to be creative and innovative, so not just do things the way that we've always done them, ask why, what's the purpose of it, and what are the things that we've learnt from this year that we could just continue to be creative. So ask why not, why can't we do that?
Yeah, beautiful. Belinda?
I think that whole attitude that we can change quicker, because we're humans don't like changing naturally, so we take things slowly, whereas we were forced to do it really quickly and everyone just did it. I don't mean at a frantic pace, I don't mean to continue that, because that was not necessarily a positive thing, but I'm just talking about that we can do it. So taking that positive, that there was changes to be made, we adapted really quickly and we had positive outcomes, so celebrate that and then bring that into continue when we're trying to bring in new initiatives or new learnings.
Beautiful. Mark?
I think when we think about what might be new, that there is a very strong link. Wellbeing enables education, education enables wellbeing, and that link goes back and forth. And we're at our best when we do our core business, which can be cliche, but teaching and learning remains the core business. The best way to have the biggest impact for kids is to allow teachers to collaborate, continue to share, and reducing that variability. Like, that's a strong moral purpose, reducing the variability between classrooms to ensure that all kids have opportunities that are as equal as we can get them.
Beautiful. Darren?
So I really like a number of those ideas, and I think that it'd be really cool to reimagine how school occurs, so that school doesn't just have to occur from 8 till 3, because that winds me up. And why do we need these set weeks of holidays every year and things? And I actually think that now there's an opportunity to really do school remarkably different, to be honest with you. If the technology exists, people are comfortable with technology, I think there's a way that actually the way that we deliver curriculum, where we use space when kids are at school, when they're at home, when teachers are at school, and when teachers are at home. Like, I don't think a teacher just has to be at the school venue from 8 till 3. I think there's just this, I would like to think that we can actually be a lot more flexible in how we move forward as an educational.
Absolutely, and I think that would be something when I move back into education as a, as a parent, but also an educator and as a professional. Something that I see is what we do often is band-aid solutions, or we bolt on, and we constantly work with what's there, but bolt on. The curriculum's a classic example of that. And I think for me it really would be that freeze and that reassessment back to that fundamental of teaching and learning. And often in the work that I do, I ask teachers and I ask students, why are we here? What are we here for? And if we don't have clarity on that, everything else falls apart, which I think this year is really a highlight too. So I think there's so much that has come from it. And thank you so much to our panel for sharing so openly what you've been doing in your schools and those successes in your own communities. I think the value is immense in terms of what's been happening, and hopefully we can continue this collaboration into the years ahead, because definitely we'll work it together, we'll change that world and move things through. So thank you all, it's been excellent. So, can I ask you to hold for 1 minute, Fran? I just have 2 questions that came from the room that I'd like to make sure that I address as well. So, look, this question we've sort of answered in our last comments and those sorts of areas, but out of the sake of definitely respecting the audience members that share, do we genuinely feel there will ever emerge a new normal? Or is it unlikely that schools will ever go back to how they were last year? And I see Jackie busting to answer this question.
No. I just think, I actually think that, look, I think some places will try to go back to that. Right?
Yeah, I think the question is, do we want it to, as opposed to do we think it will? I think you don't want it to, but I think possibly
but I think the pull is definitely there. I've said, I've talked to people about it regularly. There's that whole, I just want things to go back, and there's enough of that sentiment, I think, it's definitely still around. There'll be some communities and their schools that will try to go there. There's no doubt about that. My feeling is that they can't fully. I just feel that there's going to be too many moving parts now that have dislodged that paradigm, that we really are, they're going to be, whether they like it or not, are going to be compelled to find new ways of doing things to deal with this. Because even if we don't have closures again, which would be lovely if we don't, but even if we don't, I just think parents and community expectations are now so radically different that they're going to have to answer those questions. So, when I was down at the cafe, when we were all locked down and everyone around our area was still supporting our local cafe, and we're all standing around 1.5 metres away, and the dads are there and they've dragged their kids out to go and get the coffee, and the question was being asked, Jack, you're a teacher, I haven't been for a while. We finished all the work by lunchtime. Is that normal? And I'm going, you know what? That's a really good question to ask, and that's a question you've got to continue to ask, because that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. And so parents, I think, are empowered to ask questions ask and see things differently. I don't think those schools are going to be able to go back to exactly the way they were.
Just 2 things on that. I think some things should probably go back to normal. There are some things that are really important to the teaching and learning, and I think the balance is what we need to do. I think we don't throw everything away, and I think secondly, it'll be up to the leadership to have the vision around how that looks for their particular school and context. And I think it's easy to think everything has to shift. There's so many different contexts that are going on, and I think it'll be the challenge of hopefully the leadership that has the vision to be able to look at what is appropriate for that particular school. So,
Anyone else? Margaret?
We're talking about learning for students here mainly, but we're also the opportunities for teachers to learn for professional development, the access to courses that they would not have been able to go to because they've been virtual. There's been, it has been said many times, we are all in it together, but so many publishers, so many companies, consultants, great professional development opportunities have often been free, and so, your inbox is full of these excellent PDs, a lot of them are free, that we can access from all over the world from leading experts. And so for me, it's not only learning on the student level, but for the staffing level. So I would hope, and like you say, it is a responsibility, one of our key responsibilities as a leader, not to allow it to go back to what it used to be, because there are so many opportunities that we've embraced. We've just got to keep soaring with those.
Mark, do you have anything else?
I think you've captured it really well. I think just the one thing, I think in the first couple of weeks that we were learning from, I think there were different groups maybe licking their lips thinking, we're not going to have to build schools. And by the third week and the fourth week, and what you saw when their kids came back, tears, and schools will remain. They will remain as physical places. Maybe they're not there 5 days a week, but they are, and we've heard this, like they're the hub of the community and so on and so forth. They are. And the idea that they won't have to build schools in decades, that disappeared very quickly. But there was an interesting sense that they sort of went, we won't need them. I was like, just hold on tight. Because you could sense that. The first time we did the Zoom assembly, and we did our first Zoom assembly with 900 kids, there was this electricity. Like we just felt this sense of they're back, and even though they weren't, and we didn't see them then for quite a while, but schools are really important, and we have to make sure that people remember that schools are really important, because people do a really good job.
Yeah,
and that has been lost.
I've written some on that, is that, once upon a time it was 3 R's of education. I now talk about 3 C's being content, curriculum, character, and community. And I think that schools do a lot in that space. We've talked a lot tonight about how content will look. I think teachers spend too much time talking. It's amazing how much work the kids can get through when the teacher just shut up after 15 minutes and can get on with their work. My kids at home are going, wow, I've got through so much work already. So that's content.
Teachers or you, Darren?
No, but character and community, I think schools actually now intentionally think about, instead of it just sort of happening by osmosis because we're just all there, so therefore we're doing community. Actually, I think we'd be a lot more intentional now as to how we build community and what's important in that and what makes it community, and I think that is a massive important aspect.
And I think that is so critical, and that connection piece, and in tertiary education, that's what a lot of people are moving from where we are into that tertiary space, and certainly I've seen it firsthand with a lot of the people that I'm working with, whether they were postgrad or whether they were new to the actual tertiary space in their poor first year experience. And that sense of belonging and connection, even if I don't know any one of these 10,000 people around me, gosh, I have somewhere to go, and I'm not just staring at my screen in some poor space. Just as a final question again that came from the audience, and I'll just give one perspective from Wellbeing Australia before I kick over to you guys, is given that COVID has affected how school excursions and other activities are going to happen for years to come, Lane Cove Public has kindly shared what they've been doing in that environment STEM sort of centre as to what's happening. What else have we developed, or what else have you guys developed in terms of activities to respond to that? And just from Wellbeing Australia, we had a lot of call out from secondary students particularly that were going, oh my gosh, we can't do work experience, I'm never going to get to know what the world of work's like, how am I going to know what it's like in that professional centre, university as well, from internships and those. So we actually designed and extended our voluntary program dedicated to high school students. We've been blessed really, had high school students that are writing blogs on their personal experiences They're filming podcasts of their peers on what worked for them and these students, using all their just natural skills, taking photos of things that matter to them and having quotes of things that impacted them from a wellbeing perspective, and really sharing in so many ways. And so that has been something that we've noticed has just really provided, but more importantly, it's given people a real sense of connection and work experience. And the university interns that we've had have been involved in our veteran wellbeing program, research side, marketing, all sorts of areas. And so these skills that people keep going, but there's no work out there, they're really growing and developing those skills with an open heart and mind as to how they're doing it. Did you guys have any other initiatives around that excursion, immersion sort of opportunity?
We do. So Duke of Edinburgh is a huge aspect of our school from 9 through to 12. I believe about 350 kids do Duke of Ed. All of year 9 go on Duke of Edinburgh, but they didn't do it this year. So we had to wait, and so there's some excursions that just haven't happened. Actually, most haven't happened, and from a paperwork perspective, that's been a blessing. People went, oh, that's really good. But earlier, I think it was last week, the first Duke of Ed group went out, but about a month and a half ago, there were all these tents at the front of the school, and they're setting up and doing that. And I think there's ways, and it's been interesting to see some of the virtual experiences, but again, you could sort of cherry pick, oh, you've got this and you've got that and you've got that. I think what it comes back to as leaders is around when you talk about the 3 C's that you're thinking about in community or connectedness and how that fits. As leaders, and you think back to Melbourne Declaration, which is still there, how do we create and develop, how do we develop and work in partnership with parents and the broader community to create good citizens? Because it's different. And kids are really clever. They come up with ideas, so student voice and parent voice and harnessing that. Who knows what will happen with the local geography excursion down to wherever and history excursions into different museums and things. But at its core, and I think you touched on it before, defining the why. And if you can define the why and there's a good reason for it and it's kids at the centre, educators will come up with the answer. And that's
I think we spend too much time thinking about, if I think about 2 words, I think purpose, so the why, and the strategy. Actually, the strategy is constantly going to change. All right, 20 years ago we weren't using MacBooks, 15 years ago we weren't using whatever, 10 years ago, like the strategy changes all the time. So I think as school leaders, you've got to keep in the forefront, what's the purpose? What was the purpose of that activity? What was the purpose of that group? Why do we do that? It's that purpose, and therefore the strategy can change. So as an saying, you marry your mission, right? But you date the model, right? So the model changes, but the mission never changes. The strategy changes and the purpose doesn't. So
a classic example of that is our Year 4s at the end of, because we're junior school, it's K to 4. So at the end of the year we have traditionally done big day out, and so for that day they go out for the whole day. They usually sleep overnight and leave on the Saturday morning. But for this year, it's a history making day, it's the big day in. And so it was student voice as to what they would like their big day in to look like. And so the teachers, again, it's probably a better day of team building, celebrations and different activities of their big day in than what they've ever had in the big day out. And so all of their ideas we've been able to, rather than saying, where do we want to go, what do we want to do? Okay, we've included so many more crammed it into the big day in.
Jackie and I in our professional worlds are working with so many different schools and so many different youth centres and things like that. The thing I noticed, because I'm involved in a lot of camps, particularly leadership, wellbeing camps, career planning, many of you guys here actually, and the reinvention and the openness. So in term 1 it was, we'll just postpone. We'll just postpone to term 2, it'll all be fine by term 2. And then obviously the year unravel. And the openness to actually let's do this. And so not a Zoom talk fest for an hour, but we like one of the things that I did a lot of, particularly in that leadership and wellbeing, is facilitated discussions. So using my knowledge and storytelling and sharing in short and sharp grabs that then teachers could facilitate the discussion within their classroom. And it really empowered teachers to have conversations they weren't necessarily comfortable with because they had that lens provided by an expert and then a very clear discussion or activity or facilitation that they knew what was expected of them. So people who were not getting involved in some of these things before suddenly were going, no, this is really good because actually I feel comfortable and I feel safe in this conversation. And I think they're the opportunities that really came.
That's good.
Beautiful, thank you. Fran.
Well, first of all, can I thank each and every one of our panel. They have given us time, they've been open, they've shared their experiences, and so collectively could we please thank all our panel. Some of the key ideas that we've explored tonight include, all right, how do we maintain positivity and wellbeing in our students and our staff and their parents? So, you know, think about how that you can take some of these away. How do we create a safe environment where people can flourish during periods of rapid change that we've experienced this year? How do we embrace change? The last two schools I was at, they were starting up schools. You had to embrace change. And so I think developing a really positive attitude towards change, that it is a positive move rather than the negative, is a key there. Breaking down some of the relational barriers that maybe Zoom might present, but using Zoom in a more positive way, particularly for parent and teacher engagement. Obviously that's been a real plus for a lot of schools. I think our panel have definitely reinforced the fact that teachers are resourceful and we care immensely for the students in our care and the communities in which we live. Students have been taking a much greater responsibility this year for their own learning. They are quite capable of it, and I think we've probably shortchanged them in the past. We've thought that we are probably more expert, and now we realise that they are amazing young people. We need to be courageous going forward. As I think Jackie said, we don't want them to adapt backwards because they can develop skills and they will develop the skills, and those skills are actually needed for their future. The resilience, the persistence, the ability to just keep going and do it in a very positive way. To prepare for disruption, expect disruption. Don't treat it as an enemy, but okay, yes, it's going to happen, so what are we going to do about it? And appreciate, obviously, many of us have appreciated extra family time and, you know, for children, free play that they often weren't going to go with, you know, they'd go and put their head in a computer or on an iPad. No, go and play it in the sun. It'll give you a bit of a fresh start. I think also the fact that we do need to prioritise curriculum development for next year, particularly the review that's going on. I can't wait to find out what they're going to do, but based on outcomes that students have achieved this year, what sort of curriculum development are you going to put into place in the schools in which you work? Can we strongly influence the factors that are going to impact direct curriculum development next year? Obviously communication is a key, and embracing technology for both parents and students. The other key thing that the panel came up with was blended learning. It exists, it works well, it needs to be planned for, and we can embrace it amazingly well in the future, and I think that's probably a really, really key thing. And more efficient ways to deliver information through the use of technology. I think talking about new norms, we must continue to develop the skills that have been gained this year. Don't put them on the back burner. We need to remain creative and innovative and very much in a positive mind frame to change. And that leads really well into, as part of the Guild's response to COVID, we are going to introduce a new award next year to celebrate the innovative and creative material that's been developed this year and hopefully will be developed in the future. And it's going to be called the Regional or Remote Teaching and Learning Award. And I would encourage each and every one of you to have a look. Applications are actually open on our website, and I would encourage you to have a look at that, because I'm sure there are many programs that you have developed at your schools that could be actually put forward in this particular award. And lastly, I will thank each of our panel members individually. Firstly, Jackie from Wellbeing Australia, thank you very, very much. Jackie Vanderveld. Margaret Pond and Darren Cox from St Philip's Christian School, Christian College at Cessnock.
Thank you so much.
Belinda Vandergert and Natalie Devonish from St Mary's Cathedral College.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark Long and Doris Lee from Penrith Selective High School. Sorry. Sorry, Diane. This is your exercise for the night, see?
Okay. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mark. And sorry,
Doris.
Dorothy. Thank you so much.
And lastly, and most importantly, Catherine Taylor, our moderator. Please thank her.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Please travel home safely, keep well and safe, and please have a very happy Christmas.
Thank you.